Okay, this evening we have a very special guest. His name is Frank Hampton, and he's going to talk to us about his times in the U.S. Army as a radio operator during the Korean War, which is kind of a timely thing with what's going on in the news. It's a war that really never ended. So, our guest, Frank Hampton.
Thank you very much. I want to thank Gary and Mike for giving me the opportunity to come and speak to you. It's a pleasure and honor. And I'll start with some personal history. June 1950, I joined the Army and was sent to Fort Ord, California for basic training. During the training I received, some of you, how many of you are Army? Okay, so a bunch of you. So you may have had this particular test. Other services, I don't know, but I'm pretty sure that the Army services gave the IMT test. Did it? Got it? Got. And they mixed that up a little bit. And they gave that to us at a blazing 3 to 3.5 words a minute. Really burning. And they set us down at a table, gave us a headset, put it on, and write down what we heard. Print as opposed to cursive. Those were our total instructions for this thing. So I sat there for the 2.5 minutes of this test that went on with that particular code going on. Later on, the first sergeant called me in and said, you're a radio operator, aren't you? And I said, well, not really. I know how to turn one on and find the music, the news or something like that. He says, oh, no, you took that INT test and you never missed a single character. So you have to know Morse code. Well, 3.5 words a minute. If you're concentrating, even though you don't know Morse code, it was kind of repetitive, so I didn't have too much trouble with it. And so, because of my test, I was sent to Fort Monmouth, New Jersey, the signal training center for the U.S. Army at that time. And almost all radio people went through the Army Training Center. A few exceptions were some Air Force and some Navy people who went to a special school. So that was my pleasure was getting on the train, going from San Francisco to Newark, and then taking the bus down to Fort Monmouth and introducing myself to that. During my stay at Fort Monmouth, my buddy, currently training in radio repair at the same facility, asked if I would like to build a 5-tube super heterodyne radio. I said, what's that? He said, well, it's a radio you can build and you can listen to it for news, radio, music, and that sort of thing. I said, well, sure, I'd like to. So I went down to the PX, bought a Heath kit, and proceeded to the hobby shop, and with considerable help, soldering and assembly and that sort of thing, because of my lack of experience and everything, we got to the point where he says, well, now we're going to go over to this other table where there's an oscilloscope, and we're going to tune the IF cans. So he got his tools out, and he showed me how to tune the IF cans with the signals going back and forth and crazy on the oscilloscope, and bring them up so that there's one signal, continuous signal going there, and then you knew the thing was in tune with that particular frequency. And you tune both cans to a particular frequency, and so we could take the radio then back to the barracks, and in our off hours could listen to the music and stuff like that. And so that was my introduction to radio manufacturing, and it was very limited. So once during the training period, we set up a radio net. The central control was in the classroom, and several Army Angry Nines. Anyone know what an Angry Nine is? Ever heard the term before? Okay, it was our designation for the system that has, the couple running the radio. This is the radio that we set up in the area between the barracks. We had a different radio inside, something similar to the walkie-talkie. And the difference between the picture you see here was, aside from the background, was that the men working the grinder and the radio were in khaki uniforms and not in combat garb. So that was the only difference that we had. We set up our net, and one person would turn the generator by crank, and when you hit the transmit button on that, you worked for your dinner. It was hard work to get that thing to work, pulling up a load. And the operator would transmit certain things that we had on paper that we were told by our instructors to do. So you did that for 5, maybe 7 minutes, 8 minutes at the most, and then you switched places. Then the operator got to find out how much fun it was to turn the crank. And so I'm under the impression, I heard that there were some of these units in actual combat units in Korea during the time I was there. So it was kind of fun to relate to the fact that some of those things were actually used by the infantry radio operators. The following March, after finishing my radio training, which I had acquired 18 to 20 words per minute, and I could transmit with a key 18 to 20 words per minute. And we had to practice also, not with just a table key, but with a knee key. Strap it to your knee and use your free hand motion to get that thing to work. And so it was kind of fun learning that, but I did learn to do that, and I got to where I was pretty good at, probably closer to 15, 16, 17 words a minute, not the maximum speed. I had to rush to do the high speed that they really wanted me to do, which of course was in reality a rather slow speed for real radio operators. At any rate, we got through that, and then when we graduated, they took us to Newark, New Jersey, put us on a train back to the West Coast, and we went through Camp Stoneman, California, went onto an ocean liner. At that time, I don't know how many of you did any traveling in those days, probably not too many, but the Lure Line was a commercial transport that they had for luxury liner. And they had decommissioned it and took it away into the Army, and they re-outfitted it for troop movement. So they had done all kinds of layered bunk beds and stuff like that in it, rather than the staterooms and so on. So that was an interesting thing. Going to Hokkaido, Japan, in the northern island. An interesting sidelight was, I heard from the deck at night, I heard this funny noise going ch 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 pow ch ch pow ch pow ch ch pow. And I went, what the heck is that? And I had been raised on a farm. I had never actually heard a 4-cycle engine like that before. And so I walked over to one of the seamen, merchant seamen there. I said, what is that noise? He said, come over here to the edge of the boat. And we looked out across the bay, and we could see the lights of the Japanese junk that was leaving harbor. And that was its motor, pushing it down, because first of all, in port, they couldn't go by sail for some regulation or whatever it was. But it was kind of fun to relate to that from the standpoint that they did have tractors that had that sort of motor on it and so on at the time. So once I got to Japan, we went from there to Tokyo area, and then they transferred us to a Japanese ferry boat. And we went to Busan, Korea, on the ferry boat. When we got to Busan, they transferred us to a Korean rail train. Cattle car? A cattle car with benches. It had benches in it. And so some of the windows were actually still intact. So it was a fun trip going from Busan, which is in the southern, western, or eastern edge of the peninsula, halfway up through the peninsula northwest to a town called Daegu. You can find it on a map. We have a map that we can show, perhaps, to show where that trip went later on. And then they transferred us to 6x trucks. Those were 1940 issue 6x trucks. So they were a nice, pleasant, unbumpy ride from there to Seoul. They deposited us at Seoul, and they directed me to the University of Seoul, where the Army, the 3rd Division, had set up their headquarters. And so I checked in there, and they directed me to the 3rd Division Artillery Section. And so I became a 3rd Division artilleryman by virtue of my radio training. Fun and games. So I can actually say I've been to the University of Seoul. I took the time, one of the things I did on my spare time was I took the time on Wikipedia to look up Korea. I was interested in Korea, paren, Chosin, close paren, commonly called frozen Chosin. And I found out that the ideology of the whole thing was that the title, Korea, had a whole chapter in the section of the book that was involved, and the final designation that we came up with was the Korean Empire. And the Korean Empire checked out, if you have any interest, it's kind of an interesting area for someone who has the background and interest in that sort of thing. While I was at headquarters, I had the opportunity to go onto a GRC, I think, 499 radio, which was a 6x truck mounted radio. They normally mount them on the back of a 3/4 ton truck, like a weapons carrier. But this was mounted on a 6x, and they stretched hundreds of feet of wire out for antenna. And this particular unit, you had to adjust the frequency by coil and by dial. So you had to change coils if you had a different frequency range. And so they had a cabinet with these coils in there set up by range, and you had to go to a particular drawer and pull out that coil and plug it in, and then dial in the particular frequency you want, and so on and so forth. So it was kind of a fun thing for me to witness from the standpoint of my very limited radio training. The 6x was, the truck-mounted 6x radio was air-conditioned for the radio's sake, not for the operator. The thing that happened to me next was I was assigned from the headquarters Division Artillery to the 59th Field Artillery Battalion. And the 59th Field Artillery Battalion was a truck-drawn 155 howitzer unit. At battalion headquarters, where I was assigned, I was part of the communication section, which made sense to me. The section consisted of radio operators, and the radio operators also performed duties as radio, telephone linemen, and mechanics. Had to have a pretty good background in order to do most of this stuff. So one of the very important functions of the radio operators was receiving metro messages. In the artillery, they had metro messages which were 10 lines of 10 numbers each. So you did really get a good idea of how to transmit and receive numbers. Didn't do too many messages, but we had a real solid number background. These metro messages were meteorology reports to tell the operator, to tell the artilleryman what they had to do as far as the guns in elevation, deflection, and the powder charge that they put in each round to fire. And so obviously if it was raining, it was going to be a little different than if it was sunny, and if it was snowing, it would be different, so on and so forth. So these metro messages were extremely important to the units that we were supporting at the time in this area. One of the mechanical things we did was the radio had to have power. So they had generators that generated the power for the radio. The generators, we had 3 of the generators on site because we had to have 3 to operate the radio 24/7. One machine was operating and plugged in and being used. Another machine was clean, ready to go, and standby. The third machine was in repair. You tore the thing apart, and you literally chiseled the carbon off the piston because they build up carbon so fast over a short period of time. And so you had to physically chisel the carbon off. Put that back together, then put it in reserve. The reserve machine came online, and so on and so forth, round robin, continuous round robin during the week. That probably would do a complete cycle maybe 3 times during a 7-day period. So it was essential to do that in order to have the thing going. The vehicles we had, a Jeep and a 3/4 ton truck to move our equipment and supplies with, the drivers who were assigned to those vehicles actually had to do the light maintenance on those things, such as lube jobs, oil change, filters, and that sort of thing. And the major repair and maintenance and stuff was done by the motor pool. After a short time in the 59th Field Artillery Battalion, the word came down asking for forward observer spotters, volunteer forward observer spotters to go and work with the infantry in a forward observer, and I was asked if I would volunteer to do that, and I said I would. We loaded our gear onto a 3/4 ton truck, weapons carrier, and our equipment was put onto a 6x, and we drove towards the line. We found the troops lined in their guns and everything, all lined up there. We kept going. We went 1.5 miles, 2 miles farther from our lines and stopped and unloaded everything. The guys got out of the weapons carrier and they unloaded the equipment from the 6x and everything. And so as the driver of the weapons carrier was turning around, he hit a mine. And the weapons carrier did a 180 degrees and landed on the driver. It was instant right that way. And because we were going up on the mountain and everything, we were told, go ahead, take our stuff, and don't worry about it, it'll be taken care of. And the infantry who was assigned to take us up there and everything took care of the driver and the truck and all that. And so we didn't have to stop and do anything about that. One of the, about the 3rd day after we were on top of the mountain, one of the infantrymen came over and asked the lieutenant if he'd come over and take a look at something on the other side of the hill. Now, the other side of the hill was facing our lines. So we took the radio, went over there and set up, and down about a mile and a half from us were some troops digging in. And it was determined that these were Chinese troops. And so I called the radio center, gave the radio to the lieutenant, and he called artillery in on these troops there. And it was one of those things that you realize that war is hell. And so I got out of that particular operation after 2 weeks of staying up there and working with the radio and the lieutenant and the other operator and the infantry that were there, and came back to my unit. Being in the artillery, we were located several miles behind the front lines. So combat to us was 10-inch Chinese mortar rounds. And if you can imagine a 10-inch shell, probably 28 inches long or so, with explosives and shrapnel and all that good stuff coming at you. That's what it was like. And so we did have some of that happen. Most of those were harassing and interdicting rounds. They would just set up a gun and start shooting. Boom, 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 just like that, and let it go. Then they'd move to a new location and do the same thing, as we would do for them from our lines. Harassing and interdicting fire missions were a common thing in the artillery. So in the middle of the night, the radio would buzz, you'd get up and you'd have a fire mission, and you have to get the CP, and the lieutenant would give the order, fire mission, and so on, and they would give them the instructions to load, the elevation, deflection, and loading, and so on, and fire. And most of those were done at random, and you'd do that as directed for all practical purposes. When I got back from the forward observer job, I was reassigned from the 59th Field Artillery Battalion to the 58th Field Artillery Battalion Able Battery. And in this assignment, actually was a result of President Truman's desegregation of the military services. The 58th Field Artillery Battalion was a tractor mount 105 howitzer unit, battalion size unit, several batteries. And what they did was they brought over brand new trucks, 6x trucks, to tow brand new Cosmoline 105 howitzers, truck drawn. So for a number of weeks, they were busy decosmolining and getting these guns set up so that they could even fire them. So it took them a week and a half or so to make that battalion operable. Plus, they had new officers, new enlisted men, and everything was all really scrambled. So that was a fascinating area for me, because I was raised here in California and Central Valley and everything, and so I was exposed for the first time seriously to that set of environment. And to be quite honest with you, I enjoyed the hell out of it. It was fun. Being young and irresponsible, I accepted everything that came at me with a smile on my face. A couple of days after we got set up there, and my orders came through, the captain called me into his office and he said, Hampton, I need a driver. Can you drive a Jeep? Well, I had never driven a Jeep before. I'd sat in one, but I'd never driven one before. But sure, I can drive a big Jeep. I'd been driving pickup trucks and trucks out in the field with my uncles. They'd set up the old Buick motor-driven truck that would had a low gear on it, a super low gear on it, and creep down the trees, picking up boxes of fruit, loading them on a truck, and I'd drive that thing no problem at all. And I had learned to drive the pickup when my dad was in the mine, working in the mine east of Fresno, and we went from the mine 30 miles down to Clovis and back, and because my dad's condition on the way back, I had to drive. So I had no problem driving at all. The problem was, we had gone on a long reconnaissance mission. The 3rd Marine Division and the 3rd Army Division exchanged places during this time in the conflict. And the officers went from their unit over to the new unit to figure out where they wanted to be and what they wanted to set up and so on and so forth, get a feel for the land. So we were driving, a day and a half with maybe 4 or 5 hours sleep at the most at the wheel. And so I was pretty beat. We came into the blackout zone. Have any of you driven a military vehicle with military night lights? Yeah. Wonderful. So you know exactly what happens when I turn the night lights on. We were in the dark. If you have a real good flashlight, you can find the thing sometimes. But anyway, we were doing probably 25 miles an hour, and I had removed my foot from the accelerator and was reaching for the brake, and the right front wheel hit the soft stuff on the edge of the road. Anybody who's been to Korea knows exactly what I'm talking about. Well, this caught the Jeep and brought it over, completely over, the edge of the abutment. We did a 360-degree wheel in that Jeep. The captain beside me, and me driving with my hands on the steering wheel. I had kicked the thing out of gear for some reason or other. I have no idea how I did it. But anyway, we went through the bushes, and it was perfect setup for that Jeep to go 360 degrees and land on the wheels. So it bounced on the wheels. I had taken it out of gear. I'd already had my foot on the brake, so I didn't have it on the gas or anything. And the Jeep was still going tick, 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 tick. And if you've ever driven a Jeep, you know what I'm talking about. That's the way they idle. They make that funny little noise. And so I managed to, like I say, break my ribs in here. The captain cut his leg as he was bailing out of the Jeep into the bushes. And the supply sergeant, who was in the back, we picked up the supply sergeant and the executive officer. They were in the back of the Jeep. They bailed back over the spare tire into the bushes. They had a couple of scratches on them. So the old man took 3 or 4 or 5 stitches in his leg. They take set my rib and take me up at the local MASH unit, and we were on our way. So a couple of days after that, the captain called me into the office and he said, "Hampton, I've never had anyone turn me over in a Jeep without killing me before. But I'm not going to give you a second chance." I understood his position. So what he did was he made me the mail clerk for the battery. Well, a mail clerk's normal position was a corporal. So I got a promotion on top of it. Went to corporal, went to the CP, where I'd been staying anyway, and became the mail clerk. Well, the other thing that they did, the mail clerk drove a weapons carrier as an assigned vehicle. I got a bigger vehicle to mess with now. So I did that for a while. The fun thing of it was I did take the Army regulation, which is about so thick, about a quarter of an inch thick, and I read the damn thing. I was that interested in what I was going to be doing. So I had a pretty darn good idea of what I had to do when I got the mail in. So I went over and got the mail every day and so on and so forth. Well, there were guys who were complaining about not getting their mail. And what they found out was an IG inspector came down to battalion, and the battalion mail clerk would get the mail in and sort the mail. Well, he'd sort the mail for a designated period of time. Whatever that was in his mind. We never figured it out. But anyway, say 2-3 hours, whatever. And that was all he did. The balance of the mail, which is not sorted yet, went into the back of a spare squad tent with some equipment with it. So after a couple of months of this, there was a pretty good stack of mail bags in the back of this squad tent. Now, I'm concerned about the mail itself. So my thought was, this mail clerk, or this errant mail clerk, probably is still in the brig, if he's alive, from doing that. So what happened was all of the mail clerk from the battery came in. We were ordered to come in for 2 hours a day and sort the battalion mail that was in this squad tent. And it took us almost 2 weeks to sort all of that, get it properly identified, and moved on and out of there so that we were current then with all the mail delivery. One of the fun things, radio operator? I don't know, but it was one of those fun things that generated as I went right on through the system. I had an opportunity while I was there to visit my brother a couple of times. He was in the triple nickel, the 555, 155 howitzer unit in the 25th Division. And knowing the call sign on the telephone, because we did the switchboard operating, I found out that the call sign for his unit, I put in a call to it, and I asked the operator, is there a Don Hampton there? And they said, oh yeah, we know Don. He's a good guy. So I went to the executive officer and I said, I found where my brother is. He's over the hill, maybe 40 miles, in the triple nickel, in the 25th Division. And so the executive officer went into the captain and he says, I have to do a recon over to the 25th Division, to the triple nickel. And Hampton's going to drive me. So we got in, we went around the mountain and got over there and checked in. And I checked in with my brother and we had a very nice chat with a couple of beers to drink, 2 beers of course, and that sort of thing, and had a nice visit. And about 2 months later, the same configuration came up, and I went over and at that time the captain says, take the 3/4 ton truck and go. And we'll see you when you get back. It was fascinating because I got a chance to go over and visit him again. And so it was one of those fun things that happens. My brother was in the Busan perimeter. He had been in Korea basically from the beginning of the potato throwing contest. And so he was a cook in the triple nickel, and in the Busan perimeter, they were close to the lines there, and I don't know if we can see the map that you have. There should be able to see that one map that we have with the lines on it. This one, all the stuff came into Busan in South Korea, for the most part, before they had the opportunity to bring it in to Seoul. So it came in here, and the Busan perimeter was running kind of like this. And all of the Korean units were lined up like this, and there was a couple of U.S. units here, and one regimental combat operation, the 25th Division and the 3rd Division was down in this area, where he was up in this area. And he was given orders to take his handy-dandy carbine out on the line and start shooting. And so it was one of those crazy things. And a couple of days of that, the people here had supply line coming, and it was all getting ready to come in and land in Busan and start pushing the Chinese back. It was one of those real dark times in his operation, his service. And when he told me about it, I thought, boy, terrible. The other thing was, we had every kind of praise for the Air Force. I say the Air Force collectively. Any of the military forces that had airplanes over there flying, we felt that they were godsend. Because what happened was the Chinese did the same thing that Napoleon did. They got their lines stretched beyond their supply capability. That's the only thing that kept the Busan perimeter from collapsing. They had outgunned, outmanned, and everything as far as the operation was concerned, except they didn't have the ammunition to shoot and they didn't have the food to eat, because the Air Force would spot a convoy on the roadway, even at night, and put it out of commission. So the supply line for the Chinese was woe begone. It was practically nil. So that was the thing that really destroyed their advance beyond the Busan perimeter that was established. They started pushing back up, and then they went back up, and way up in the top there, let me see, there's Incheon, Seoul. Beyond this, way up about where those numbers and lines are up there, was a little village called Chorwan. You bring it up on the computer, you can see it. I spent about 2 months of the last of my tour there in the Chorwan area. And I kept that in my mind for some reason or other. It stuck. Most things go in and like that, but anyway, that's one of the things that stuck. So I looked it up and I found the village, the location, the general area where we were in the 58th Field Artillery Battalion at the time that I rotated out of there and came home. So, any questions? Good. Yes, sir.
Curious, you had mentioned about the mechanical stuff covered in a protective material.
Yes.
What type of material was that? What kind of base, and how did you remove it?
The only thing that we knew at the time was cosmoline. That's the only thing that we knew. And so if it was something other based than cosmoline-based material, I really don't know.
How did you remove it?
Well, they used gasoline. Gasoline was the only thing that would cut it.
Wipe it down.
Yeah, because when I went into the Army at Fort Ord, they gave me a M1 rifle covered with cosmoline. And the company was busy cleaning cosmoline off of rifles for 2 days. And that's all they did for 2 days. They'd get up and clean rifles and get them shiny. And once they got the area all cleaned up from the rifle cleaning and so on and therefore we went out and did our marching and stuff. But yeah, cosmoline was the only thing that I know. This, of course, you can recognize Company G Signal Training Regiment at Fort Monmouth, New Jersey. One of the fun things that I had while I was there was about 20 miles away was a little town called Red Bank. Anybody that knows New Jersey probably knows Red Bank. We went to the skating rink at Red Bank and skated with the pretty young ladies there. and enjoyed it. It was fun. Next. Okay, now this is the Jeep. If you can imagine this Jeep doing a 360, right in here was a crack in the windshield. Total damage to the Jeep. They replaced the windows on the Jeep and it was back in service the next day. Crazy. Somebody up there likes me. That's all I can say. Next picture. Okay, now this is the 3/4 ton truck, the weapons carrier that I hauled. This is actually a covered radio unit. I don't remember the configuration, the number. It was a 6-something, a 616 or 6-something, or I don't remember. Anyway, there was a radio on that truck. So if I had to, I could turn it on and tune it up, find a frequency, if a directed frequency, and operate the radio. Never happened. It never happened. I just never had a reason for doing it. But that's the very vehicle that I went, got the mail every day, drive that to get the mail and come back and shuffle the mail out, mail call. And of course we talked about the Angry 9, the setup with the, this is actually a generator here, and you have to turn that generator just like any other generator to generate electricity, and man operated. Oh, this is my commanding officer prior to overturning the Jeep. Funny thing of it is, he still had a smile on his face after the Jeep turning over business. And of course the map, you've seen the trip there. Now this is a combat setup. And there's combat units across here. And these are red. Why? Because they're Chinese. And these are blue and black. And I think there's a green or orange one anyway in there that is South Korean and basically U.S. forces. One of the things that happened while I was mail clerk was we would sit in the command post at the table, playing cards, sipping whiskey. About 5 miles down the road was a Filipino regimental combat team. The Filipinos believed that they should furnish booze to their enlisted men. The U.S. furnished the beer to their enlisted men, booze to the officers. But in the Filipinos, and there were a lot of Filipinos in that unit that didn't drink anything. And they would get a ration. So they would sell a ration to the GIs that come and buy it. So we went around the table, each one of us, lower enlisted men, went around the table, taking our turns, going to the regimental combat team, buying things like Old Granddad and that sort of stuff, and bringing it back. So we had it sitting at the table leg. So you pick one up and you nip it and you put it back. You never got drunk, but you never got sober either. So it was one of those crazy things. Drying out period on the way home, on the boat. You get on a ferry in Seoul, and 2-day trip over to Japan to process. I dried out real quick. Had a real good drying out period. Thanks good for my buddy, who in the bunk above me didn't have this problem. He made sure that I went to get food and went to the restroom and showered and things like that. And it took him a day and a half to get me really sobered up before I really felt like going to the mess hall. So that was one of the fun things there. And so, any more questions?
Your communications, were they primarily CW or voice or what?
Okay, the artillery used CW. We use CW because of the clarity of signal. One of the things that the Chinese would capture a US radio. They would get on that radio with a microphone and they'd go, ah, dee 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 da 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 dee da dee 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 da. You're taking code. Dots and dashes. Oh, 10, 12, 15 words a minute. And this da 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 dee 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 da 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 da. Next signal you sent was, I think it's QRT. Please repeat your last transmission. So it was an interesting aspect of the work for the radio operator to have that kind of interference. And the Chinese were good at it. And they could find you on your frequency, and they bugged the hell out of you. So it was interesting.
Now they find us with a both.
Okay, I appreciate having the opportunity
Just a quick
to tell you
question.
my story. Yes, sir.
The equipment on the table,
Okay, one of the things here, the radio we had on the mountain, the backpack, walkie-talkie.
so
Not a handy-talkie, a walkie-talkie. And these are other units that I'm not familiar with. Whoever brought them in, they might be able to tell you more about them than I ever would. But the handy-talkie, not walkie-talkie. Hollywood destroyed this with walkie-talkie. Very good unit. For what, 2 miles? 3 max. And that's not in the mountains. You get a couple of trees between you and the next guy, and you might have a little trouble communicating.
What band?
So, anything else?
What band are they on?
What is it?
What band? What frequency?
What is it?
What frequency?
What frequency?
an 80 meter band.
Oh, I have no idea. I have no idea what frequency they would be operating on.
The walkie-talkies were in the 80-meter band.
Yes.
3,000 kilocycles. And then the backpack unit is about 27 to 38 megacycles, and that's FM.
Okay, a much higher unit, much higher frequency. And the handy-talkie, much lower frequency, right. Almost down to the commercial band.
Yeah, the handy-talkie is AM, and then the backpack unit is FM.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much for having me.